Alors, comme on l'a mentionné, cet événement ne serait pas possible sans la participation du partenaire majeur du Congrès. Et on a la chance de l'avoir avec nous aujourd'hui. Je vais l'inviter à venir nous dire quelques mots. Il est vice-président vente à l'assurance collective à la capitale, M. Carl Laflamme. Merci.
Merci beaucoup. Bonjour tout le monde. Au nom de toute l'équipe de la capitale, ça me fait bien plaisir d'être avec vous aujourd'hui pour cette rencontre de la Fédération des commissions scolaires du Québec. Et pour nous, c'est la 3e année consécutive qu'on est le partenaire principal et on en est extrêmement fiers. Mon épouse est enseignante depuis plus de 30 ans. Je suis donc très bien en mesure de mesurer tout l'impact que vous avez dans les écoles et dans la communauté en général. Ça fait donc 30 ans qu'elle me dit qu'elle exerce le plus beau métier du monde, puis je pense que j'ai fini par la croire. Ce sont vos efforts communs, votre dynamisme et votre esprit créatif qui permettent d'offrir un environnement stimulant pour nos jeunes. Peu importe l'endroit où l'on travaille, il est essentiel de reconnaître les efforts qui sont déployés au quotidien. Le secteur de l'éducation, je pense que je n'aurai pas besoin de vous convaincre très longtemps, en est un extrêmement exigeant, où les clients, principalement les parents, en demandent toujours plus. Et, bien souvent, malheureusement, ils oublient de reconnaître l'apport essentiel des professeurs et de tout le personnel qui œuvre dans les commissions scolaires. Malheureusement, je n'ai pas pu être avec vous hier soir, mais je crois que le thème était très bien choisi, soit mettre en lumière les initiatives des commissions scolaires pour encourager l'épanouissement des jeunes, favoriser l'intégration et l'inclusion, combattre les préjugés afin de permettre à chacun d'atteindre son plein potentiel. La capitale est née il y a plus de 75 ans par un groupe d'employés du secteur public désirant procurer un peu de sécurité à leur famille. Aujourd'hui, la capitale a grandi, mais on conserve toujours cet attachement envers nos origines. Nous nous démarquons par la présence et le soutien à la fonction publique québécoise. Il n'y a aucun autre assureur qui peut prétendre d'être aussi impliqué que nous le sommes et on en est très, très fiers. Et cet engagement se poursuivra puisqu'il est au cœur de notre plus récente planification stratégique. Et c'est dans cette optique de reconnaître le travail et les efforts des employés de l'État que depuis plusieurs années, nous avons créé les prix reconnaissance de la capitale. Ces prix sont remis exclusivement à des membres du personnel des services publics dont les qualités exceptionnelles ont été reconnues par leurs pairs. Ce concours connaît d'ailleurs une grande popularité puisque l'année dernière, il y a plus de 100 personnes qui ont été mises en candidature pour les 5 prix que nous remettons. Reconnaître, c'est mettre l'humain au-dessus de tout et c'est donner la primauté à la personne. Et c'est dans cet esprit que j'aimerais vous présenter Mme Éliane Rioux, qui est responsable du service de garde à l'école primaire La Martinière à Lévis. Par son esprit d'initiative, cette jeune femme a mis sur pied un projet pour apporter du réconfort aux élèves avec des besoins particuliers. Et elle a reçu le prix Coup de cœur du jury 2019 dans la catégorie Réseau de l'éducation des prix Reconnaissance de la capitale. Je vous invite donc à écouter Mme Rioux pour vous parler de son projet dans cette courte vidéo.
Mon nom, c'est Éliane Rioux, responsable du service de garde à l'école La Martinière à Saint-Nicolas. C'est une école primaire qui est dite une école régulière, puis il y a des élèves intégrés dans les classes régulières avec des besoins particuliers, des élèves avec le TSA, avec l'anxiété, avec des difficultés comportementales, puis différents besoins particuliers en fait à l'école. C'est Tiga, de son nom de travail. Donc Tiga, c'est le chien de réadaptation à l'école qui fait des petits miracles au quotidien. Tiga va souvent, dans le travail qu'il a à faire, il va souvent s'installer à côté d'un élève, que ce soit pour un travail à accomplir, une dictée. Là, il va venir apaiser, il va venir diminuer l'anxiété, il va donner confiance à l'élève à ce moment-là. Il va aussi accueillir des élèves dans mon bureau. C'est lui qui les accueille, en fait. Puis ça va être sous forme de récompense, sous forme d'apaisement. Donc, il va venir récompenser le bon comportement. Il va venir apaiser une crise. On va aller dans mon bureau. Il va permettre à un élève aussi de, supposons qu'il a vécu une grosse situation problématique là, qui pour lui est très difficile à gérer. Donc, au lieu de prendre une période ou 2 périodes à se replacer puis pas être capable de finir sa journée, lui, il va lui permettre à l'élève, des fois en 10-15 minutes, à se replacer puis à reprendre la classe. Donc, on a une belle réussite du côté des apprentissages, là, de la disponibilité de l'élève. À la base, en 2014, j'ai été famille d'accueil pour la Fondation Mira, puis il venait à l'école avec moi tous les jours. On avait utilisé le chien pour récompenser des comportements d'élèves pour qui c'était plus difficile, pour qu'on essaie d'atteindre des objectifs. Puis quand le chien est parti en formation, dans le fond, on a vu... on avait un manque à l'école, ce qui fait que le projet est né en lien avec ça. Puis on a eu aussi... on a de plus en plus d'élèves avec des besoins particuliers. C'est grandissant avec la clientèle qui augmentait, mais on s'est dit ça prend quelque chose que les humains ne sont pas nécessairement capables de faire, comme le chien. Fait que c'est un plus vraiment qu'on apporte, là.
Le fait qu'elles soient honorées, qu'elles reçoivent un prix, c'est toute la reconnaissance du travail depuis des années, là. Nous sommes fiers d'elle, nous sommes fiers de son implication et moi, je suis vraiment heureuse que son travail soit reconnu à sa juste valeur.
Je pense que c'est vraiment un bel exemple qui va exactement dans le thème de favoriser l'intégration, combattre les préjugés pour permettre à chacun d'atteindre son plein potentiel. Alors, je vous remercie. Je vous souhaite de bons échanges et une excellente journée.
Merci. Merci, M. Laflamme. C'est un émouvant début de journée qui me permet de mettre en perspective l'importance du travail qui se fait au quotidien dans chacune de vos écoles. Alors oui, acteurs d'avenir, hein, quel beau thème on a ensemble aujourd'hui. Et dans cet esprit, n'eût été des expériences extraordinaires que j'ai eu la chance de vivre dans mon passage à l'école. C'était la commission scolaire des Bois-Francs à l'époque. Bien, je ne serais même pas devant vous aujourd'hui. Quand j'étais à l'école, j'ai eu la chance de faire du théâtre, des concours oratoires, du bénévolat, d'aller travailler en Haïti. J'ai rencontré des adultes signifiants qui ont vraiment fait une différence dans les choix d'avenir que j'ai pu faire. Et je suis certaine que chacun d'entre vous aujourd'hui, si je vous dis de penser à un adulte signifiant dans votre parcours scolaire, il vous vient une personne en tête, je suis certaine de ça. Cette personne-là explique peut-être même votre présence ici aujourd'hui ou les choix de carrière que vous avez faits dans vos vies respectives. Alors, c'est vrai donc que les décisions qu'on prend aujourd'hui vont avoir des répercussions sur les générations à venir. Il ne faut jamais, jamais le perdre de vue en tant qu'élu scolaire. Alors, je me sens liée à vous parce que très reconnaissante, évidemment, de ce que l'école publique m'a apporté et de ce qu'elle continue d'apporter à mes enfants. Mes garçons ont fréquenté la commission scolaire Marie-Victorin. Maintenant, je suis nouvellement dans la région de Saint-Hilaire. Alors, je salue les gens de la commission scolaire des Patriotes. On reçoit des très bons services à l'école Au fil de l'eau. Bientôt, ce sera l'école Osias-le-Duc. Alors, voilà. Avant de débuter nos conférences d'ouverture, quelques petites consignes importantes. On a mentionné donc qu'il y a des ateliers au choix cet après-midi. Le premier étant acteurs d'avenir pour le développement durable. Donc, toujours dans cet esprit, prendre les décisions aujourd'hui pour le bien-être des élèves actuels, mais également sans compromettre le bien-être des générations futures. Il y aura des échanges, des présentations donc sur le thème du développement durable. L'autre atelier, c'est des acteurs d'avenir pour la diversité et l'intégration. On connaît tous l'importance, la richesse d'expériences que les personnes issues de l'immigration peuvent nous apporter. C'est riche également d'enseignement. Et on a des commissaires qui viendront partager leurs expériences positives à cet égard. Le troisième atelier, des acteurs d'avenir pour une communication efficace et transparente. On le sait, on est dans une ère de communication en ce moment. Les choses vont extrêmement vite. La communication, c'est un terrain qui appartient vraiment à ceux qui l'occupent. Donc, comment, à l'ère numérique, un élu scolaire peut-il entrer en communication de façon efficace et transparente avec sa communauté. Je garde un bon souvenir, l'année passée, ceux qui étaient avec nous, il y avait Mme Arelle Bourdon qui avait présenté une initiative qui est faite à Montréal, par exemple, de publier des petites vidéos qui démystifient le rôle des élus scolaires et de les publier comme ça sur Internet, par exemple. Alors, c'était une belle initiative à souligner. Il y aura sûrement d'autres belles choses qui vous seront présentées dans le cadre de cet atelier. Alors, merci donc de respecter vos choix. On connaît l'importance du ratio maître-élève. Alors, pour nos ateliers, c'est la même chose. Ils sont présentés, ces ateliers, donc, en partenariat avec la Banque nationale, SSQ Assurance et l'Anglois, Société d'avocats. Donc, on ne les remerciera pas assez, ces partenaires. Donc, on débute ce matin en vous présentant un portrait de la démocratie scolaire aux États-Unis et au Canada. Et pour ce faire, on a l'immense privilège d'accueillir ce matin 2 leaders du monde scolaire nord-américain. Ils arrivent respectivement de Washington et d'Ottawa. Ils sont ici donc pour échanger avec nous sur les enjeux auxquels font face les commissions et conseils scolaires en Amérique du Nord. Donc, ils vont partager leurs points de vue, leurs expériences sur l'impact de ce palier démocratique sur la motivation, la persévérance, la réussite des élèves. Il y a plusieurs questions qui seront soulevées. Ça nous permettra aussi de faire le corollaire avec ce qu'on vit actuellement au Québec. Vous pourrez également leur poser toutes les questions que vous désirez. Des questions seront soulevées comme quels sont les enjeux de la gouvernance scolaire? Est-ce qu'ils sont les mêmes aux États-Unis ou au Canada anglais qu'ici au Québec? Quels sont les principaux défis auxquels ils font face là-bas? Est-ce que c'est similaire à ce qui se vit ici? De quelle manière se vit également la complémentarité entre l'administratif et le politique? Et comment la gouvernance scolaire, finalement, vient favoriser la réussite et la persévérance. Grosso modo, on va soulever ces questions et bien d'autres. On vous l'a dit ce matin, pour ceux et celles qui sont arrivés peut-être un petit peu en retard, il y a de la traduction simultanée qui est disponible pour les présentations. Il n'y a pas de gêne, on a probablement tous appris l'anglais à l'école publique, mais on ne veut rien perdre. Alors, il n'y a pas de quoi là, si vous utilisez la traduction simultanée. Si vous ne l'avez pas, c'est un petit appareil que vous pouvez vous procurer en allant discrètement à la table juste ici à ma droite. Vous pourrez donc avoir la traduction des conférences. Vous pourrez adresser également vos questions aux conférenciers lorsque le moment sera venu. On a des micros un peu partout dans la salle. Pas de souci, si vous êtes timide, vous pouvez très bien poser votre question en français. Les conférenciers sur scène auront la traduction simultanée de vos questions en anglais. Ils pourront y répondre et comme ça, on pourra suivre les conversations dans une langue et dans l'autre. Après les présentations, j'inviterai votre président, M. Alain Fortier, à se joindre à nos conférenciers pour faire naître l'échange avec eux, les questionner entre eux et avec vous également, bien sûr. Nous aurons également pour les périodes de questions, parfois les gens me disent en congrès, « Marie, moi je suis gênée d'aller parler au micro, j'ose pas poser mes questions devant tout le monde. » On a une petite application qui s'appelle Slido, sli.do. Alors, si vous avez un téléphone intelligent, dans votre petit magasin d'App Store, par exemple, vous allez télécharger sli.do et vous pourrez vous joindre à l'événement et poser vos questions aux conférenciers en les écrivant et on les fera apparaître sur les écrans. Alors, ce sera notre façon de fonctionner. Alors, ceci étant dit, je vous présente nos conférenciers. Alors, d'abord, le premier possède une feuille de route impressionnante dans le monde scolaire américain. Il a reçu de nombreux prix et distinctions. Il figure notamment dans la liste des 20 leaders d'opinion en éducation pour sa contribution au dialogue national sur l'éducation publique, selon la société Trust Ed. Accueillons le directeur général de la National School Boards Association, M. Thomas Gentzel. Et pendant que M. Gentzel se joint à nous, je vais également tout de suite présenter notre prochaine présentatrice. Elle peut se joindre à nous sur scène. Elle est diplômée en sciences infirmières de l'Université d'Ottawa et elle mène 2 carrières de front. Donc, elle est directrice des projets spéciaux au sein du réseau de la santé de l'Ontario, en plus d'être impliquée activement dans le monde de l'éducation depuis 20 ans. D'abord, comme élue au conseil scolaire du district de Limestone à Kingston, Ontario, elle a présidé l'Association ontarienne des conseils scolaires pendant 3 ans. avant d'être nommée présidente de l'Association canadienne des conseils, commissions scolaires en 2018. Non pas nommée, mais bien élue, nuance importante. Donc, accueillons cette présidente, Madame Laurie French. So thank you for being with us today. We're listening to you first, Mr. Gentzel, and then we'll hear Mrs. French, and we'll discuss governance issue after your presentations.
Merci. Bonjour. Je parle français un peu. So I appreciate your indulging me in English. This is a wonderful opportunity to be with you, and I want to thank my good friend Elaine for the invitation to be here. I also want to say just a brief word about the award winners last night. They were exceptional in any language. You should be very, very proud. That was wonderful. It was a great start to your conference. Well, folks, I am from the United States. We have some things in common, some differences. Difference, for example, you have polar bears. We have Donald Trump. We'll just leave it at that. Leave it at that. But for our purposes today, let's focus on the similarities. We're both democracies with diverse populations. We both recognize the importance of an educated citizenry in order for a democracy to work. We also have established school boards, school committees. They may be called different things, but they have this responsibility to oversee the delivery of education in your communities. And both countries were experiencing real challenges to that local governance role. Now, these challenges come in different forms and from different people, but I think they have some things in common. From my experience, and this is 39 years of working with school boards across the country, when I've seen these challenges, and I suspect it's true here, they generally come from people who don't value the role of schools as a part of a community. They don't necessarily value innovation at the local level, and they really don't see schools as an asset, but rather just simply as a service to be delivered. And I'll even venture to say, for many of them, they have all the answers. They don't really need you. So that's the challenge that we face. So let me see if I can get this cranked up here. See, I meant to have that on the screen when I started talking. Our two countries. And you'll notice there is no wall between those flags, folks. Okay, I won't be political anymore, I promise. So let's talk a little bit about school boards. Those who challenge school boards, I think, really are asking a question, several questions, and I think we should all be able to answer them. First of all, why do you matter? What is it that you see as a value that you add? And quite frankly, what would be missing if you were gone? Now, we know this is not a hypothetical question. I'm well aware this issue is squarely in front of you here in Quebec. It's also, of course, already happened in Nova Scotia. I think Laurie's going to talk about that a little bit. And we see it all over. We see these challenges to local governance. Now, we can be angry about all of this. We can be upset, or we can build an argument against it. And that's what I'm hoping we can do today. First of all, and I want to be clear, this argument is not about efficiency. Because quite frankly, local governance means doing a lot of things in a variety of ways. It can be messy, but out of that comes innovation, and from innovation comes improvement. So if your goal, anybody's goal, is simply efficiency, you want everything operating exactly the same way in all schools at all times, then probably school boards just get in the way. Let's just let the Minister of Education or some other official make the decisions. But our point is this: efficient is not effective. Out of this innovation has come some great innovation in our schools, in your country and certainly in the United States as well. And that is something that school boards foster. School boards are in a position to not only allow that to happen, but to encourage and reward it. So that's something that no provincial government, I think, can ever provide, is this sense, and honestly, after all these years, this is probably the most important piece to me, is this sense of community ownership of your schools, the sense that your communities see this as the greatest asset, and you want to make sure that it's constantly improving. And related to that is this sense of accountability. Accountability to the people who elect you, the people who are served by your schools. You know, the thousands of school board members I've known over the years, and by the way, from every walk of life that I could possibly imagine, from coal miners to astronauts, lawyers, doctors, I mean, you name it. This is the strength of school boards. And it's also important because you're in the community. People know you. I'm quite certain. Let me ask this question. How many of you have been stopped on the street by constituents? Somebody has a question. They have maybe a suggestion they want to provide to the school board. This is something that's unique to this institution. So the word accountability, I think, is critically important because it means you are holding yourself out to receive input from the community and to also respond to it. So let's keep talking about school boards for just one more moment. Unlike policymakers who are in a distant office, perhaps in your provincial capital, perhaps someplace else, issuing mandates, school board members see what's happening in your community, and you are able to respond to it. So this was interesting to me. After all these years, I had what I called a blinding glimpse of the obvious. Because when you look at this map of the United States, it occurred to me that every one of these states has school boards. They all have school boards. And in fact, they have boards because our public in the United States is very clear that they want local leadership of education. The Gallup organization, you're familiar with Gallup, did a poll a few years ago and found that a majority of Americans wanted school boards to have the greatest influence in what's taught in the schools, not the federal government. And so they see this as a critically important piece. The local governance in our country actually goes back to the 1600s, actually just south of here in Massachusetts. 1647 was when they created schools, and it was a requirement in the Massachusetts Bay Colony that schools be created. Now, there's a long history, I won't go through it, but ultimately they decided that it was important to have what they call and still call school committees, school boards, to oversee this operation. That concept, this notion of local elected officials in each community, spread across the country. Every state decided on its own that this was the model they wanted to follow. Now, we have school boards. You have school boards. But simply having them doesn't mean that they're necessarily effective. And so this is what I wanted to share with you today, with some of the research that we've done about effective school boards. And I present this not to presume to lecture you, but to give you some arguments and some rationale for the continuation of boards, because I believe that a lot of these attributes that we're going to be talking about are critical, number one, but number two, they are not things that can be easily delivered by anybody else other than school boards. So let's talk about what NSBA and our Center for Public Education has called the 8 characteristics of effective boards. Number one is a commitment to high expectations for all students, and setting goals to achieve that. These districts have a detailed understanding about what's being done to accomplish that. Now, I wanted to say, as an aside, one of the strengths of school boards is that you're not expected to be an expert in education. You are expected to bring the views of your community to the table and to make good decisions. But in doing that, it is important that you have an understanding of why these educational decisions are being made, and it's all driven by having high expectations for all students. You have a shared belief and values about students and how the learning environment should take place in your schools. Those districts that are the highest performing are the ones that don't accept excuses. There may be issues with poverty, there may be issues with lack of parental involvement. Those are challenges to be addressed. They are not excuses to deny any student a quality education. A third attribute, of course, is the accountability issue that I talked about. This is being focused on policies to improve student achievement. This is the work of school boards. Number 4 is collaborative relationships with your school employees and your community. This is true engagement. This is hearing what people have to say, receiving that input, making good decisions, and equally importantly, I believe, is explaining decisions once they're made. Another important attribute is the use of data. School boards that are most effective from our research take data and utilize it and make sure that that's a basis for a lot of the decisions. And I might add, importantly, even when the message from the data isn't very good, this is where continuous improvement comes from. It's where questions, of course, are asked about, well, what can we do to improve the reading scores in that school? What additional resources do we need to provide? Now, again, I'm going to just pause here again to say, I know you know most of this, but think about some of these attributes in the work and who else would do this. Would your Ministry of Education do all this in your schools? Is there another system in place that would ensure that this happens and is translated back to your communities? Another attribute, of course, is the alignment of resources. This is a key role for a lot of boards to make sure that the resources are going where they need to. And then finally, united with your, now I've been corrected, we say superintendent, I believe it's directors of education here, but the persons who you hire to lead your school system. You're working as a team. And I want to say on this point, I've had school boards over the years say, well, you know, in our board, we often have divided votes. Let's say there's 7 members on a school board, and it could be 5-2, it could be 4-3. And my answer to that is, well, that's actually a good thing, right? On occasion, at least. Because if the concept is you're bringing different points of view to the board table, you would expect you're not going to agree on everything. But here's the point, I believe. A board is not dysfunctional if it disagrees. A board's dysfunctional if it can't make a decision. So you need to be able to make a decision and then be able to move on. But that whole process of bringing different points of view together and debating them, discussing them at a local board table, that's a unique role for school boards, and it's critical for that community ownership that I just talked about. And then finally, boards are really focused on team development, not only for your staff, but for you. The very fact that you're here today is a testimonial to your willingness to give up your personal time to come and learn and be effective. So it takes that kind of commitment. Now, a lot has changed, but all of this is focused, as you can see, on improving student performance, student achievement. When I started this work back in 1980, and I can't believe I'm saying this, but it's been that long, we talked about the 4 B's of school boards: buildings, buses, budgets, and ball games. Buildings, buses, budgets, and ball games. You know what I'm talking about. The board made sure the school facilities were in good condition, that the transportation system was running, you adopted your budget, you allocated resources, and of course, importantly, in our country, and I suspect here, that the athletic programs were also running pretty well. But the education piece, that was the administration's. That was their job. Well, my argument to that is, yes, it is. That's why you hire quality directors for your schools. But if the school board doesn't feel a sense of ownership and responsibility for student achievement, it's likely not going to happen. So I wanted to talk a little bit about a related work that we've done. And I'll make sure this is all shared with you, and I'm happy to talk to you later about any of it. But we did some research based on really a seminal study that was done a number of years ago called the Iowa Lighthouse Study. And it really looked at the question of where do school boards spend their time? And is there a relationship, a correlation between what school boards do and student achievement? And the answer was yes. If boards are properly focused, now this isn't causation, this is a relationship, so it can impact student achievement. And so out of this came our key work of school boards, which we just updated again a few years ago. And this, I hope, will look a little bit familiar in light of what I just talked about with the 8 characteristics. But the first one, of course, is that vision process, the role of setting high expectations. And this can include vision statement, mission statements, strategic planning. It's that looking over the dashboard and setting a direction for the school system. Accountability, I'm sorry, I'm running behind here. Accountability is this focus on student achievement, always talking about what can we do to ensure that students are learning. I don't want to presume what your board meetings are like, but we tell our school boards in the United States, your board agendas say a lot about the focus of your board. And if most of a board meeting is spent talking about bus stops and budgets and ball games, you're probably not focused on students as much as you should be. So this accountability measure is talking about making sure we're holding yourselves accountable to stay focused on what's important, student results. The board's role in setting policy is another critical example. This is where we're talking about establishing policy and guidelines and letting the whole community know what the expectations are. This is a powerful lever for leadership at the local level because you're sending a message and direction to the school team. So defining policy, making sure you're in compliance with current laws and requirements, constantly monitoring that is a critical function. And then the community leadership role is one that I keep coming back to. We know that when boards are actively engaged with the community, engaging them not only in terms of what they think needs to be done, but actually making them feel like they have that stake, that ownership in the schools, success is far more likely. It is an effort, really, to bring everybody on board. So collaboration means inviting others to the table, hearing what they have to say, not necessarily doing what everybody wants you to do, because that's why you're elected, right? But to make sure that they feel that they have been heard. My sense of all of this is that in many times when there is frustration in a community or in an organization, a lot of it has to do with people feeling that nobody's actually really listening to them. And the act of listening is an act of leadership. And then the board superintendent, board director relationships is important. I hope that you view that as a critical element, that your director and your team, your staff believe that they're part of a team with you. And clearly, you're in the leadership role there, but you should all be seeing this as common effort to move the ball along. So, this is something that has to happen outside of just the formal board meetings. I've often talked to boards, new board members when they get seated, and I'll say, so how well, let's take a board, a school board. How well do you all know each other? Well, know each other pretty well. We've seen these folks around. Yeah, well, now that you're sitting together at a table, you're in a new relationship, and you need to understand how other people look at information, how they process it, what they need to make a decision to be able to be effective as a team. That requires some time. And you know this as well as I do. When even one person turns over on your school board, your school board has just changed. The dynamics on the board have changed. So this process of building a team and sustaining a team is really important. Now, I'm going to go out on a limb here and ask if anybody remembers the Ed Sullivan Show. Anybody ever see this television show? Elaine's seen it. This was a show that was the hands are slowly going up. I know more of you remember this show. But it was an entertainment program. And one of my favorite acts on this show was the man with the spinning plates. Do you remember this, Elaine? This guy had long poles. Let's say the stage was like this. And he had plates, and he would try to get them spinning, all 10 of them spinning at once. And there was this frenetic music playing, and he would be trying to get the plates spinning, and he'd be getting to hear, and that plate is wobbling, and he goes back, and he's trying to get that plate going again. Why am I telling you this story? That's your life. That's your life, right? Because our work is never done. We don't get to step back and just look at all the plates spinning and say, well, this is really good. Now, there's always a wobbly plate. And that means that you need to have a good team and you need to be in good communication with each other. So let me wrap up by saying this. These are the most important arguments, I think, for school boards. And that is the community ownership. You represent the community's ownership of your schools. You're stewards of the greatest asset in your community, which are the schools and, of course, the education that you provide to your students. You provide direct daily accountability to the people who are most directly impacted in a way that nobody else can. And as we know from what we just talked about, your work actually affects student achievement. It can impact student achievement. So this battle that is coming, the storm clouds that are gathering around this whole issue of school boards in Quebec is not new. We've seen it here before in Canada, and we certainly see efforts in the United States, mayoral takeovers, takeovers by governors, but they all look pretty much the same. And as I said before, it has a lot to do with kind of a lack of understanding and respect for that community ownership. So first of all, I want to thank you for the invitation today. I want to thank you for your service, and I want you to know that you have friends in the United States who support you, and we will stand with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Alors, on me fait le message que vous n'êtes pas obligé non plus de télécharger l'application Slido, mais que vous pouvez vous rendre sur le site Internet. Alors, simplement, donc, dans votre navigateur, sli.do, vous allez arriver sur le site et vous n'aurez qu'à entrer le code de l'événement. On pourra vous le partager tout à l'heure, j'imagine, sur les écrans. Merci beaucoup. Thank you for this presentation. We'll now hear Mrs. French. Thank you for sharing these arguments. We will use them. And I've heard them too in previous events, so thank you for sharing that with us. We're listening to you. Thank you.
Merci. Bonjour tout le monde. Comment ça va? Excellent, excellent, excellent. C'est un grand plaisir d'être ici à Sherbrooke. Je regrette que je ne parle pas français. J'aimerais bien. But I am most grateful that you are allowing me to present in English, so thank you for that. And thank you to Tom. Our presentations, I think, fit really nicely together. Certainly, we often say that in Canada, as in North America, we have much more in common than apart. And so I was really happy to see that our messages are so aligned. So I'm going to move ahead into my slides, and you'll see that the Canadian School Board Association, I'm very proud to have served the last year as president of the CSBA, and you are very well represented by Alain at that table. The Canadian School Board Association is a partnership, really, but an association at the national level that comprises the presidents and the executive directors of each of the provincial school board associations. And so that's a very important table for us. Despite that, we are well aware there is not a national Ministry of Education, but the involvement of us and that combined voice and partnership across the country is critical to support school boards and to support student success in public education. The CSBA represents over 300 school boards, and we're very proud to say over 400 million students. So we're proud of that achievement, but it's important for us to stay focused on what is our role then. The Assembly of First Nations is also a member at our table, and that's a fairly new development, but has also been important for us as we work with supporting all children in Canada. So our three strategic goals that CSBA works on, and we have a strategic plan, and we're renewing that this year and reaching out to make sure that we're really reflecting the work of our organization with what school boards need across the country. And so you can see some of the areas of focus for us, that national voice on school boards, and we regularly are called upon to speak to events and topics of national importance. Just last week, our organization was asked to speak at the National Committee on Physical Well-Being and Physical Activity for students, for example. We have a declaration relative to school health and well-being. We made a declaration relative to the legalization of cannabis and the impacts on students and schools of that, and how we must be involved in that implementation and those kinds of work. Of course, Indigenous education is one of those critical voices, and we have a very strong and well-represented Indigenous Education Committee as a part of CSBA as well. But really, it's about that support for school boards. So how do we help school boards across Canada to be successful? None of this is new to you. Education today across the country, we have many challenges that we share, and in particular, the risk to democratic voice that we know is underway presently in this province most imminently, but is not a new conversation that we've heard. The other challenges that we face every day, of course, relative to the complexities of our classrooms, the diversity of student needs, and all of the budget costs and increasing demands and social expectations of our schools are incredible. However, I would say, and very pleased to be here to help, I hope, arm you with messages that you can take forward in the months to come around the importance of local access to school boards and democratically elected representatives who know what's happening in your communities and who can speak on behalf of students as policy decisions are made. The current environment as well related to that changing role, and Tom talked about effective boards. And I think what we need to keep in focus is that whether we love a school board or don't love a particular school board, whether we think they're effective or not effective, and all the wonderful contributions that they make, the question at hand is about democracy. The question at hand is about how do we utilize that school board. We have an election process that will change that school board if necessary, but we have to retain that level of involvement in the school system. And so how do we work together to ensure that that's there? We are constantly evolving. We're well aware the system is not static. Since before the Constitution, school communities have elected a school board to ensure that the needs of that local school community are met. And that's really how we will continue to evolve to our current roles and functions to ensure that we're continuing that success and contribution in education. You can see, we often talk about there's room for everyone. In a world where many countries still fight to have the right for democracy and votes, why would we reduce a level of democracy? Why would we do that? It makes no sense. There is work for all of us to do to ensure success for students. And I think that one of the biggest challenges that we face, and I've often talked about, sadly, as a trustee for 20 years, I am immensely proud of the work that I do, and yet many, many in our communities don't understand the role. They don't know what we do, and without some of those direct connections, they maybe don't care. And that's a critical problem for us when school boards are being challenged. People will often go out and rally for particular supports, cuts to education, autism programs, a myriad of issues that we know are important in the heart of our communities. There's not many that will go out and rally for a school board trustee. And so we need to make sure that our communities are aware of what those roles are. So as we talk about the reality of the situation, and you can see this is not new, but the uphill battle, we talk about that a lot. This is constant work for us, and this is where we're all needing to work together to ensure that we're facing the challenges head on of the system and making sure that people know that we're here and the value that we offer. Building those relationships in communities is critical now more than ever. It's interesting to us, and you well know, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms and the protections related to the expectations and governance of education in support of minority languages. Who would have ever thought that we had to protect the rights of majority languages? And yet that's exactly what we're facing. And so when we talk about democracy and the right to have a say in our local communities and the education needs of our children, this is really the fundamental question at the end of the debate. And so how are we going to protect that? When I talk a little bit about some of the provinces, we'll see what's been lost and why this is so critical as we go forward. So in Ontario, I'll talk about it first because this is of most comfort to me, of course, but in Ontario we also have a unique situation in that we're the one province that still has 4 distinct school systems. And so you can see we have not only our English public, but our English Catholic, our French public, and our French Catholic systems, that while we work in separate associations and we elect our trustees distinctly in overlapping regions, we work very much in partnership with our Ministry of Education. And that's an important part of demonstrating the value and the ability to work together. 72 school boards in those 4 systems are there, and over 2 million students. We are facing major upheaval in Ontario, and I won't get political, but I will say that there's an interesting environment in politics in Ontario right now with our new PC government that was a change after many years. And so how to understand and evolve to work with a new government and a new style of policy setting is critical. And understanding the difference between protest and advocacy is becoming very important in the Ontario context. We cannot break relationships. We are nonpartisan. You gotta love the one you're with. And so we need to make sure we utilize that system to be effective for our children. Saskatchewan, you can see the Saskatchewan School Board Association is represented at the CSBA table with 27 school divisions, and you can see the breakdown there that is inclusive of those various school boards and school groups. Back in 2018, they had a bit of a review in education, and at that time they were successful. However, as you know, this is not a new question relative to what's happening in education and the understanding and respect for school boards. They are currently conducting a review or a survey relative to the education system that's being provided. So while they were successful 2 years ago, and they have some very good examples of partnership there, they're doing a bit of review that's much more of a focus on curriculum, so more the outputs of education, not so much on the governance role. Alberta also has a new government, and so you can see their structure there with 61 English and Francophone school boards. They as well are in a situation now to take a look at how they're working with their government partners and demonstrating the value of school board governance and in public education. Oh, I've gone backwards, sorry. British Columbia as well, 60 school boards in that province. I would say British Columbia is in the most admirable position right now. I attended their AGM recently, and their Minister of Education was very direct in saying that those provinces where there are questions about school boards and in fact the existence of school boards, when that may be lost, those provinces will regret those decisions immensely. And I think that's valuable. For us at the national table and CMEC, or the Council on Ministers of Education, working with that group to understand and have these ministers talk together about this is part of what we're doing, but sharing those positive examples. When I talked about lots of work for all of us to do, this is what's critical, right? We can work together, and they have a very unique co-governance model in that province. So all of their decision-making around education happens in partnership. Very valuable example. Manitoba is where I'm getting closer to the areas of worry. There is a significant review of education underway in that province, and there has been direct mention of the existence of school boards. The commissioner who has been hired to do that review is in fact the person who wrote the report that resulted in the demise of school boards in Nova Scotia, so we're very concerned. That said, they are working very hard. They have an outstanding social media campaign underway to promote and raise awareness in our communities of the value of school boards and the work that they've done. They are the one province that still influences local tax rates relative to education and can levy a tax to implement a program, which is different, but it's allowed them to be very explicit about the value that school boards have offered and the response they've had as far as serving the needs in particular communities. And so a really important example there. So Atlantic Canada, this is where we start to see some problems, larger than life. Newfoundland is down to 1 English and 1 French school board. They are still at our CSBA table, but their role has evolved significantly and not for the positive. So we're watching what's happening there. Prince Edward Island, as we know, no governing school boards. They do, of course, retain a role for French language, but a big problem there as well, and they are not at our CSBA table. Nova Scotia, as you know, last year, there are no longer governing school boards as far as English representatives and 1 provincial French school board left. And that was an interesting example as well relative to other minority voices that are lost. They had, for example, their Mi'kmaq Indigenous trustees represented there who now have lost their voice as well, because as much as they've moved to advisory committees and some of the other structures in place, advisory is not input, and that's a very different distinction that's critical going forward. New Brunswick, many years ago, lost their school board trustees, but because of the public outcry and the loss of transparency and accountability in the system, they brought back what are called district education councils. And so we have their participation at our CSBA table, a little bit different structure, and still important role for parent advisory councils in that, but elected chairs at that table across the province are key. So I have some videos to show you a little bit more as you prepare for and are in the midst of the battle that I would say is upon us relative to school boards in Quebec. I wanted to share with you some messages from folks in Nova Scotia and their articulation of what they have lost. So I'll ask the IT folks who were very kind to help. If you could play the first video. Paul Wozni is the president of the Nova Scotia Teachers Union, which is another important voice in partnership. And he's going to talk to you a little bit about what he sees has been lost in Nova Scotia as you prepare and think about these thoughts. So the first video, please.
And I suppose the biggest ticket item is that public education is now governed exclusively by politics. Our Minister of Education is elected by constituents in a particular region of Nova Scotia. The Minister of Education is a political appointment. It's determined exclusively by our Premier. And the Minister of Education, who sits in that role, ultimately that's a political decision of our Premier and the Premier alone. We can't replace them for failure to do a good job. We've lost the nonpartisan students' first voice in politics. It was a level of politics that saw women at least roughly equivalently, or perhaps a little bit better than half, maybe a little better than general population stats. But it was the one level of elected governance in Nova Scotia where we had engagement that was closer to sort of the broader diversity we see in the Nova Scotian population, and it's gone. And now the government makes all those decisions behind closed doors, really according to party priorities. We don't have clarity. When the government makes announcements, we don't know when they started making a decision. We don't know how they made a decision. It's really about what they want to share with people, or if they want to share at all. and parents are confused. They're more frustrated than ever with how things are going in public education, and they are not getting answers from people that our Premier promised, that the Minister of Education and our Deputy Minister, that you could just call them and they'd have an answer for you in a couple, within a half day, and you wouldn't have to go through all the rigmarole of dealing with a school board. And ultimately, the minister has downloaded all that work to teachers and to principals at the school level, and it's having a real impact. There's a lot of stress and strain on the relationship between parent and teacher and parent-principal, and ultimately, that's creating a lot of problems at the school level. When people are angry at you, even though it has nothing to do with you or how you're doing your job, that puts a lot of strain on a relationship that students need to be a very positive one in order to have the best possible experience in school. So, in a nutshell, those are the...
So I think it speaks to some of the great concerns that we have, and the arguments and that you need to make, but the conversations you need to have with your community members so that they understand what's at risk here. The second video that I'll show, Adam Davies is now a member of one of the new advisory councils that has been put in place in Nova Scotia, but he was a former school trustee. So his perspectives are important as well. If you would play the second video, please.
Since elected school boards were eliminated in Nova Scotia. In the time since, I think 3 different concerns have emerged. First are the school advisory councils, or the SACs. They are supposed to be the venue for parent and community input and the only remaining local decision-making body. Unfortunately, not all schools have SACs, others do not have enough members on the council, and in many cases, members are taking on responsibilities they did not want nor were prepared for. In my own experience over the past year, I have seen how the local SACs struggled to work with student achievement data and how there was no support given to it in that role. It was difficult for the SAC to access information when they needed it. Moreover, the council does not meet every month, and many people do not go to the meetings, which meant few people within the community knew what was going on and what decisions had been made. The second is communication, and this is perhaps the most troubling. Communication between home and school, between students, parents, and the education system has become one-directional. That is from the department outward, and it is designed only to inform people, never to involve them. There are important questions being asked on everything from busing and staffing to program or course availability and resource allocation, but answers seem to be in short supply. It is becoming harder to know whom to ask about such things, and one-directional communication means that answers are not necessarily forthcoming. Many people are turning to their MLAs or the minister for answers and information, but that is impractical, which leads to the third concern. Transparency within the system has been lost. Common refrain from many parents and those within the community is what is going on. No one seems to know. Announcements are being made, but there is often no explanation given, context cited, or opportunity for discussion. Key decisions about such things as funding and allocation are being made behind closed doors, away from public view and oversight. This year, the budget process is taking place, but so few people know what the budget priorities are for the upcoming year, and no one will explain how the decisions are being made. All in all, the connective tissue within the system is gone. Here in Nova Scotia, school boards were ideally positioned to link together different parts of the education system. They could help steer parental concerns through the complex system, and they gave voice to local issues. They were a local, accessible contact for students, parents, staff, and the community to ask questions and to learn about what was happening within education. They were advocates for the important changes which have to be made within education, and they provided a public forum for discussion and, more importantly, debate. All of that is now gone.
So we were grateful that they sent us a little message. You can see they were all en route with backgrounds in hotel rooms and cars, but their messages are important as far as understanding where we could be headed and how to front-end load those conversations so that our community members are also aware of what's at stake for them. There's just a closing comment. If you could play the third video, I thought that Paul Wozni, the teacher president again, had a great closing comment. If you could play the third video, it's very short. Maybe not. Okay, well, we'll carry on, not to worry. You got it or no? Well, we can certainly play it. Just wave if you get it, and I can tuck. Oh, there he is.
So if you are in a province and you are looking at changes for that include removal of school boards, I'd encourage you to align with people that represent your students first, and do so without any kind of partisan politics in the mix, and fight for that, because ultimately it's a cornerstone of quality public education, and you'll definitely miss it when it's gone.
So I thought he wrapped that up nicely. So if I can move to the next slide. There we are. Okay. So, of course, I don't need to tell you about what's happening in Quebec, but we are watching very closely from the CSBA, and we are here to help. If there is something that we can attend, we've had correspondence in the past. There's lots that we can do to ensure that your communities understand this is about a national approach. This is a national value that is at risk, and we are all here to work to protect this. The CSBA, as far as what we're doing in some of the work, and I'll ask that we talk about this a bit. The activities we've undertaken, as I mentioned, some of the correspondence and so on, but we've also undertaken a bit of an advocacy campaign and started to build on a toolkit that all provinces are able to use. What we've found, though, is that, in fact, the local context is unique in some ways, and so one message does not fit all for Canadian school boards, just like one size does not fit all for our students. And so what we're doing is really promoting the work that's happening here. So working with FCSQ and QESBA as well to make sure that we're responding to what are the particular messages that you're delivering so that we can reinforce that and support it. A number of other processes around professional development as well. When Tom talked about effective school boards, that's always key. That underpins what we do. And so at the CSBA, we do provide an annual professional development event, and I hope to see some of you there perhaps in Toronto in July, where we do provide professional development around ensuring that we're effective in delivering on education governance. So this just gives you a little sense of some of those advocacy activities that are there. Our local voices, local choices, and school boards matter. The local voices, local choices were stole directly, unashamedly, from Manitoba. We thought that was a great tagline, and so we're attaching that to all of our messaging, and I encourage you to do the same. In many ways, it's starting to trend, and that's important as far as building that public awareness, and school boards matter. Those are the messages that we're trying to deliver and promote at the national level. And you can follow our Twitter accounts, of course, but we would also love to hear if there are other things that we can do. We are here to help. We are here to advocate on your behalf and to ensure that school boards are understood and effective as best we can. So I thank you for listening to us today and having some time for us to dialogue a bit. I think there's going to be some time for questions, so I look forward to anything you might want to ask. And once again, thank you for your indulgence in my speaking English. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. French. So I invite you to stay with us. You can put on these headphones so you will hear the questions in English. So we will continue to discuss governance issues with you, and I will invite the School Board Federation President at Découvreur School Board to join us, Mr. Alain Fortier. Je pratique mon anglais, je m'amuse. Et je vous rappelle donc, si vous voulez nous envoyer vos questions sur le site de Slido, sli.do, le code de l'événement, c'est très facile à retenir, FCSQ. Donc, vous entrez FCSQ et vous allez pouvoir joindre la conversation, nous envoyer vos questions et on les fera apparaître au besoin à l'écran. Alors, Monsieur Fortier, je vous laisse lancer la discussion avec nos invités. Moi, je suis là en soutien. On peut prendre également des questions dans la salle. On a les micros répartis un peu partout. Je vous invite aussi à vous y rendre. Alors, la parole est à vous.
D'abord, merci infiniment,
Ça fait plaisir.
Marie. Thank you so much. But I will speak in French because they will realize that I don't really speak English. So I will speak in French. Tom, Laurie, merci beaucoup. Vraiment très inspirant. Et je vais saisir la balle au bon parce que vous dites qu'est-ce qu'on peut faire pour aider. Moi, je pense, en tout cas, que le premier geste qu'on pourrait faire, c'est émettre un communiqué de presse, chacun d'entre vous, qui déclare que vous étiez ici et que vous avancez des valeurs tellement fortes, hein, ces valeurs de communauté, d'éducation. Enfin, on va travailler avec les gens de communication. Ça, c'est la première chose. La deuxième chose, et je vais tout de suite lancer la discussion autour d'une idée qu'ils ont ici qui est extrêmement inquiétante, qui fait le parallèle entre les school boards élus ou bien des conseils d'administration. Et une des manières de dire on ne veut pas éliminer les school boards, c'est on va juste les transformer et créer des conseils d'administration. Est-ce que vous voyez dans cette idée-là un glissement, une équivalence peut-être? Est-ce qu'on parle de la même chose lorsqu'on parle d'un conseil d'administration versus un school board élu? J'aimerais peut-être vous entendre à ce sujet, in which order you wish.
So thank you for the question. I think it's very much a slippery slope. What we need to understand, the devil's always in the details, and so understanding the scope and the breadth of what this proposed role would be, but why? A board of governors is, if it's an appointed role, then right there we've lost what is the essence of local voice and local choice. That will be some of what we heard in the video, the risk of partisanship, where that has not been the case or should not be the case from the way that school boards operate as a locally elected individual as opposed to what we would see in an appointed board of directors. We do struggle sometimes with people understanding, and it gets at that ensuring that our communities know what school boards do. We aren't elected municipal councils. We aren't ministers or MNAs or any. We are truly nonpartisan representatives of our local community, and we function as one in a school board. And so the value of that is directly accountable to student achievement is what's critical and what's potentially lost in the different model that you're talking about. And I hope that gets at your question.
In the United States, some boards are appointed. The vast majority are elected. And I think the essence of school board governance in the United States is based on the elected model. So it's sort of the exception if they're appointed. I agree with Laurie, though. I think, the point I made earlier is one I would really want to reiterate, which is that the strength of a school system is that people believe that there's somebody sitting at a table making decisions, at least hearing what they have to say. And when you have the elected model, you're much more likely to see that happen. And there's that direct sense of accountability that I don't think you get in other kinds of governing situations.
Thank you.
On peut aller avec des questions
Bien
de la
sûr.
salle, bien sûr. Est-ce qu'on en a reçu sur le Slido? On peut peut-être les diffuser. Je vais en faire la lecture et puis on entendra la traduction. Alors, une question pour M. Gentzel. Que pensez-vous de la nomination de Mme DeVos comme responsable de l'éducation? On aimerait vous entendre là-dessus.
Well, actually, we just had a meeting with her this week, and we have an initiative working with the national business organizations talking about workforce development, and it was a very good meeting. Look, she was a controversial nominee. She was barely confirmed, as you may know, and so in many ways, I think that's limited her political capital that she has to promote certain agendas that would be very concerning to us. And in fact, honestly, Congress is not really taking any of them up. So what we've tried to do is find places where we can work with any administration. In this case, workforce development was one. School safety is another. We did a lot of work with the Federal School Safety Commission. Our job, and I think all of our jobs, is to try to engage policymakers whether we agree with them or not, regardless of their political party. So we've had other secretaries of education who were challenges in their own right. So again, we try to find the places where we can try to work together and at least make sure there is a working relationship. When anybody slams and closes the door on another party, you've obviously eliminated any opportunity to try to work issues out. And I know there are efforts here to meet with, for example, the Minister of Education, despite some clear statements that he's made, but I commend you for doing that, because I think that's a sign that you're dealing in good faith, and that's always important.
Merci. Est-ce qu'on a d'autres questions qu'on a reçues dans le Slido? Oui? Alors, on va les faire apparaître. Alors, voici la prochaine de Anonymous. Quelle approche nous suggérez-vous d'adopter vis-à-vis les personnes qui choisissent le secteur privé ou l'enseignement à la maison plutôt que le secteur public? Alors, est-ce que vous avez une opinion là-dessus? Qui désire intervenir? Madame French, Monsieur Gentzel?
Well, I'll jump in. Look, one of the arguments we've always made is that people should have the opportunities to educate their children. If they have a different environment, they want to send their children to a private school, we've always supported that right. But what's really important to me is underlying this is that we make the opportunity available for all children to have access to a quality education. And that goes back to the very first point I made, which is this is critical to the success of a democracy, that there's a well-educated citizenry. So it's a commitment that both countries have made, that all children will have access to a quality education. I think the difference here is that we want to make sure that the system that is funded with tax dollars is one that is accountable to the public. And so that's a unique issue that I think school boards can address.
And if I can add, here, the government finances private schools. You don't. Right. You don't.
That's a very big difference.
Mrs. French?
Yes, I think this is a really important question because, you know, as healthcare and other things become privatized, it's a reality. But in a funding-based system, ensuring that we maximize the resources, success for all is foundational to what we do. And so, of course, my initial reaction is I would like all resources dedicated to public education so that we can do the best for all children. That said, I think, you know, people are always going to make choice, which is why this is so much more important for us in public education, because there will never be the option for all families to choose any kind of private form of education, which is why it's critical for us to ensure for the future of society that public education is strong. And so we need to make sure we are not disadvantaging by any support for that. I don't think that we'll ever win the argument that there would not be a level of private education. It's about ensuring that we continue to thrive and provide the best opportunities for all children in public education.
Merci. Est-ce qu'on a d'autres questions dans le Slido? La voici la prochaine. Quelle est la raison principale qui explique, selon vous, la volonté d'abolir les commissions scolaires? Monsieur Gentzel.
As I mentioned, this has come up in a variety of different ways. In some cases, it's eliminating a school board, or in some other places in the United States, there is still a quote-unquote school board, but it's handpicked by the mayor or some other official, and basically it's not an operating board. They're kind of just carrying out the orders of somebody else. And I think the reason that we see it is, as I mentioned before, I think there's a fundamental distrust that some people have that local officials can make a good decision. And if you come into an office, whether you're a minister of education or you're a governor, a mayor, you have some position of authority, and you believe, honestly, that you have all the answers and you know how things need to run, you don't want to deal with others that are going to get in the way of that. So this, as I said before, it's not about efficiency, because it can be highly efficient to have one system that's running exactly the same everywhere. But that's my point. It's not necessarily, and usually isn't, effective. And if we're really focused on student achievement, I think we want to be more effective than efficient.
Madame French?
Yes, I would agree. I think this is about control at the end of the day. This is ultimately about control. That said, that will rarely be the reason that is expressed, right? So we know there will be many other arguments thrown around that might in fact suggest why this is a good idea. And I think that, you know, for the public who may not understand what we do or understand the system, it sounds reasonable to them when you say we're going to get rid of a level of bureaucracy, or we're going to save some administration money, when that's rarely what it ever turns out to be. I know that previously in this province, when this question arose, the argument at that time was around voter turnout. And we know that you're the province that does not align to municipal elections like the rest of us do, which is a different debate. But regardless, we've always said democracy is not about how many choose to exercise it. It's about the right to have that choice. And so voter turnout really should not be the reason that we would remove a school board. In Nova Scotia, the logic they gave was around student achievement. Students were not achieving well, so school boards were not doing what they were supposed to do, which was crazy, because when you actually looked at PISA results, for example, that compare provinces, there was not a significant difference. So we need to really be prepared for all of these arguments to debunk them. I believe at the end of the day, they're talking about control, and we need to make sure that that's in fact what we're advocating against, that this isn't about control. This is about ensuring that we're responding to the local communities and that people have their process.
Thank you.
If I may just jump in, Laurie, you made this point a little bit earlier, and I would think it's something we all need to keep thinking about. And don't take this personally, but most people really don't know what school boards do, right? I mean, they don't really pay attention. Often that may just be a sign you're doing your job really well. But I would say, as you go into this debate, to kind of set the table for the discussion that's coming, have the conversation about what boards do and the value that you're adding, because you're going to be very much prone, I think, to this argument that we're going to save money or this is more efficient if people don't have that sense of understanding of why boards make the contribution that you do.
Monsieur Fortier, vous vouliez clore sur cette question et ensuite on va aller avec vous dans la salle pour votre question.
Oui, merci, M. Blais, d'attendre 30 secondes.
Patiemment, merci.
Ce que j'aimerais poser comme question, c'est bien sûr mieux faire connaître ce que les conseils scolaires font, ce que les commissions scolaires font. Est-ce que vous auriez un conseil à nous donner pour atteindre cet objectif-là? How do we make the population know better what we do? Or what do you do in the States and what do you do across Canada to do that?
Have you seen initiatives?
Well, for example, I talked about your constituents, the people you represent who talk to you, who you talk with on a regular basis, the communications that your board has with the public before and after you make decisions. They may know that, they may not know that. But even if they do, they need to be reminded. And the question is kind of what I said before, what's going to be missing if you're gone? And it's that connection with the community that will be missing. You heard in the one video from Nova Scotia, there are decisions being made and nobody is explaining why. Nobody is able to answer some questions. That's what boards do. And so I think it's important to remind them that that's a role. And you can probably cite examples where you individually or your board as a group have been in the community engaging, and to point out that's all gone if this decision's made.
Bon point. Madame French, allez-y.
Yeah, the understanding and ensuring people know what's at stake is critical, but talking about those real examples. So think of the successes in your communities. Think of the things that you've been involved with, the debates, the questions you've asked of staff, the programs that you've challenged when maybe they weren't delivering for students. Those are the examples of how your involvement has been key that would not exist. Often, you know, if a school's being closed or a bus route's being changed, those are the times that people might remember that there's a school trustee.
But aside from that, share the good news. Confidence in public education. That's the story we need to be telling every day so that people say, oh yeah, that's why those people had that election, and that's why there is a school board, so that I have someone to go to. I can ask a question, someone who knows about my school. You can, even if you had a direct line to the Minister of Education, he or she is likely not going to know the name of your school, what's happening there, the challenges in your community, the needs of your particular students. Talk about those things because you know those things.
Faire connaître et partager nos bons coups. C'est bien dit, Monsieur Blais. Merci pour votre patience. On écoute votre question.
Bien, vu que Slido ne veut pas que je vous pose la question, j'ai
bon.
le micro.
Parfait. On vous écoute.
Ma question, c'est savoir, est-ce qu'ils sont inquiets avec la montée du populisme, qui sont inquiets par rapport aux pressions qui vont être faites au niveau des institutions démocratiques, soit au Canada ou aux États-Unis?
Oui, on l'observe partout en Amérique du Nord, effectivement. On aimerait bien vous entendre là-dessus. On a parlé de M. Trump, d'ailleurs, ce matin, en ouverture.
Well, let me just say, what I'm about to say is not necessarily an official position of the National School Boards Association.
It's a personal position.
Right.
We understand that.
But I am deeply troubled, honestly. I think there is perhaps a lack of understanding about democratic institutions. I don't know what polling has been done here, but there's some very troubling polling in the United States about asking people basic questions about the Constitution and about the different branches of government and the number of people that really don't know that. And that's, in my opinion, not a knock on the public school system because there are a lot of people of all ages who really aren't familiar. And if you don't understand what those institutions are, or more importantly, why they matter, then you're more prone to these kinds of arguments that this is more efficient. I mean, we could argue, and I don't want to go too far with this, but I would just say there have been forms of government that we have collectively, Canada and the United States, fought against over the years that made the argument that they were very efficient. You know, if you want the trains to run on time, then you don't necessarily need a democracy. But as Winston Churchill said, it's the worst form of government, democracy, than anything else. But it's better than anything else. And so it can be messy, it can be difficult, but I think ultimately people have to understand. I mean, we were talking about they don't know what a school board is. As I said, don't take that personally, because they probably don't know what your provincial government does really either, right? I mean, people just are not paying attention. And so that is very troubling because it creates a climate where people can move in and make these kinds of changes and not meet a whole lot of resistance.
So, Mrs. French, maybe quickly on these questions because we have many of them on Slido. So
all right. Well, then, just quickly. I mean, I think there's a shifting tide in how the public is engaged in politics in general, and so you know, with Ontario's experience, and some of you may have seen Mr. Ford in the Premier Ford in the news. There is a different appeal to individuals in a community. And so we need to think about how that strategy works. The public spoke in Ontario and selected someone who was for the people. So how are we evolving, when we talked about evolution in our slides, how are we evolving to engage the public? And we're here for the public too. So let's demonstrate how that happens.
Yeah, thank you. Monsieur Fortier?
Et pour compléter, l'inquiétude, elle est grande. Puis, M. Blais, je pense que vous soulevez encore une fois, fidèle à votre habitude, des questions pertinentes. La vague, elle s'en vient de la Nouvelle-Écosse, elle s'en vient de l'Est du Canada, et elle nous frappe. And if we die, you die. I mean, on est tellement important au Québec, on est au centre. Si la démocratie scolaire disparaît au Québec, les prochains, c'est l'Ontario. Et ensuite de ça, il y a une question qui se pose au Manitoba, on réfléchit à Saskatchewan, et ça n'a pas encore atteint la Colombie-Britannique qui vient d'investir 3/4 millions de dollars pour la formation des élus. Mais quand même, la vague vient de l'Est et s'en va tranquillement vers l'Ouest. Et on devrait tous, au Canada, être très, très, très inquiets de ce
Populisme, oui.
Popularisme.
Oui. En fait, on peut... Partageons nos bons coups. Soyons populistes en partageant nos bons coups à grands coups de hashtag sur les réseaux sociaux pour se rapprocher justement peut-être des communautés. C'est une réflexion à faire. On a une question dans la salle et après on va aller au Slido également. On vous écoute.
Merci. J'aimerais vous entendre sur une couple de perceptions que j'ai. La première, c'est que le pouvoir appartient à la personne à qui tu es imputable. Donc, si tu es nommé, le pouvoir va appartenir à la personne qui t'a nommé. Si tu es élu, le pouvoir va appartenir à la population ou aux citoyens. Ma première perception. La deuxième, c'est que le développement économique, social et culturel d'une communauté passe par l'éducation. Donc, si on est nommé par le ministre, ça veut dire qu'une seule personne est responsable ou a le pouvoir de modifier le développement économique, social et culturel d'une communauté. J'aimerais vous entendre sur cette perception. Merci.
Who would like to answer that? Mrs. French?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I think this gets at the point we made earlier about control, right? So when you are accountable to the community that elected you, you have a different responsibility than when you are accountable to a minister who appointed you and who comes from a political platform. That's just the way it works. And so I think that's part of what we need our communities to understand. I've never heard of a government that was 100% elected by anyone. There's never been a party elected by 100%. Close sometimes, but not 100%. So that means there are always differing views in our communities that we have to give voice to. And that's what we need to advocate for in this model, because otherwise, the role changes entirely. If you are an administrator appointed, that's really where you're going to go. You're going to take direction, and you're going to roll out policies and funding decisions and programming that's based on the political platform that was delivered there. So I think this is the crux of what's at risk.
Thank you. Mr. Gentzel?
Thank you. The gentleman makes an important point. This is about exactly that, but I want to just offer a caution and perhaps a suggestion. If this is framed as a control issue, that's very likely not going to turn out real well. Because the argument from some people, again, those who may not understand these systems and the institutions of our democracy, the answer would be, well, he's the Minister of Education. Why don't you just let him make the decision if it's a control issue? But I would argue, again, this isn't just that. I mean, it is that. But it's also, more importantly, about how do you view your schools? Are they a part of your community? Are they an asset for your community? Or are they simply an outpost of the Ministry of Education? Those are the two views. And so if you see it as a community asset, that the community embraces the school, it's a gathering place, it's important, then you want local leaders overseeing it and making sure it's meeting the needs of the community. If you see it simply as a service to be delivered, and I read something where your minister said that, well, then, let the ministry run it. But I think that's the different model, and I think that's the way it should be framed, because I believe, and I know it's true in our country, and I suspect it's true here, that most people believe the schools are one of the most important pieces of any community. And if you frame it that way, I think you're in a much stronger position to argue for the continued role for school boards.
Thank you. On va aller avec une question sur Slido. Et je vous en ferai la lecture. Donc, on en a plusieurs. Un des arguments qui justifie le retrait de la démocratie scolaire est le faible taux de participation. Comment voyez-vous cette réalité et comment y remédier? Faible taux de participation, j'imagine, oui, aux élections scolaires. Mrs.
Okay,
French?
sure, and I'm happy to speak to this. I touched on it briefly earlier, but I know that this was part of the position or the argument last time, a couple of years ago, when this legislation was surfaced. I think, it really gets to my point about democracy, right? We have a structure in place where we have the right to have a say. Whether we choose to use that is not. We'll choose to use it when we choose to use it. So it's not about the volume. Yes, of course, it's a very positive thing when there's active community engagement. But as Tom said, sometimes when we're satisfied with the way things are going along, then we don't need to get involved. We're in a unique position in education in that there's varying degrees of understanding of who actually benefits. And if you have a child in the system, you're much more interested than perhaps if you don't. And yet, as Tom said, this is a community asset. We expect our schools, and we were talking about this last night, the expectations around schools and the social learning and you know, the issues that we expect our teachers to talk about with students, you know, some of the diversity in education. We leave our schools to deliver those messages and to develop the next generation of society. If we can't all see ownership in that and see that as a community asset, that's a different discussion. And that might be part of our strategy, is helping the rest of society to understand why this is a public service they need to be aware of. But I think that's really where it takes us back to participation, is as you increase awareness of your role, as you increase understanding of why everyone is invested in this, if you increase confidence in public education and the good work that's happening and the positive stories, that should help. I always believe that the way that we have, the model we have in other provinces where this is part of municipal elections just makes sense. It's a cost savings. Why would we run two separate elections? We should have them combined. We're also in partners with our municipalities. They too have a different lens on services in a community at that community level, at that local level, that's different from provincial governments. So let's work together. If we do this well, they can leverage some of their public services with what we do in public education, and we can make our communities very successful. So it's about connecting the dots, and that will, in turn, increase public involvement in the election process. Absolutely.
Merci.
Mr.
Gentzel?
First of all, I love this question because I don't presume to know your turnout here and so on, but we get this question a lot in the United States. And there is a real irony to it because it often is brought up by legislators and others who themselves were elected by a relatively few people. That didn't seem to bother them. It doesn't seem to undermine their authority to challenge somebody else who might have been elected with a relatively low turnout. So, I mean, I'll just say it. I think it's a bogus argument completely. There's an election. I agree with Laurie. I mean, if there are ways to encourage more people to vote, that's always a good thing, and we should be encouraging it. But it doesn't undermine your authority at all. And in fact, here's another way to look at it. My glass is always half full. This one's completely full. But if you were to say, well, we have low turnouts, but there's not always a lot of turnover on the board, that's actually maybe a sign the community's pretty pleased with what you're doing. From my experience, the public really tends to turn out if they're upset about something. So that's not a good reason to vote. Don't misunderstand me. But the fact that there may be low turnout doesn't mean that democracy is not working. I think we should encourage more. But I think that's some people want you to buy that argument or want the public to buy that argument because I think they see, you know, the ability to try to undermine your authority. And I think you have to fight back on that one.
Et ça remet en question beaucoup cet argument aussi, la légitimité justement de la démocratie scolaire, malheureusement. Monsieur Fortier, vous vouliez intervenir?
Oui, en fait, j'ai une question parce que je rebondis sur ce que tu dis, Tom. On a un travail qui est extrêmement complexe à faire, c'est-à-dire que nous sommes tous capables de développer un argument intelligent parce que nous connaissons ça, parce que nous y avons réfléchi, parce que nous sommes impliqués depuis plusieurs années. Comment fait-on pour que ce que nous comprenons se comprenne facilement dans le public qui lit moins les journaux, qui ne lisent que le grand titre d'un article, s'ils lisent un article? L'opinion publique se construit sur une ligne, 2 lignes. Et nous, on est capable de développer un argument parce qu'on y réfléchit. Comment fait-on pour passer d'une compréhension articulée à la même compréhension, mais avec si peu d'arguments?
Avez-vous des idées, des solutions? En tout cas, ça nous donne de bons plans de discussion pour l'atelier cet après-midi sur la communication. Yeah. Monsieur Gentzel?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. First of all, I would argue that there is not a public, there is not a general public. There are a lot of publics in your school system. And so it's really a matter of trying to connect with them in a variety of ways. I mean, with all due respect to the news media, that's an important outlet, but we know a lot of people don't read the paper anymore. A lot of them don't rely on traditional media. Social media, of course, can be very powerful. But what I've found from my experience is it's the informal networks. And I'm expecting a lot of heads to nod with this next statement. I think most of you know people in your community who are well connected to people in the community. And they may not have an official title in front of their name like mayor or commissioner, but they just interact with people. Years ago, I had a barber. Yeah, I have to go to the barber. And by the way, I have to pay the same amount as people with a full head of hair, and that's wrong. I'm just saying. But the reason I tell this story is his name was Merle. He's since retired. But Merle had this little barber shop, and in his shop came lawyers and legislators and moms with their little kids in tow and working people, I mean, just a whole cross-section, and he interacted with all of them. And he's the kind of person that if you get him information about what's happening in your system, he not only can help get it out, but when there's misinformation, somebody sits in his chair and starts complaining about the school board, and Merle says, well, you know, that's not exactly right. He's got the credibility to correct that information. So I encourage you to think about informal networks in your community, because you all know these people, and many of you are those people, and I think that's how information, because that's the credibility question. I want to believe what I'm being told. I may not necessarily believe what the school board's saying in some official release, but if Merle tells me it's all right, I'm going to believe it.
Merci pour cette belle piste de réflexion. J'aimerais qu'on prenne une dernière question de Slido. Le temps file, malheureusement. Alors, par respect pour ceux qui ont pris la peine de nous envoyer des questions. Alors, M. Gentzel, pouvez-vous développer votre pensée au sujet des différences entre les Elected School Boards? On l'a fait, celle-là. Bon, merci de me... On va aller avec celle de Sandra East. Selon vous, quel serait le moyen que vous utiliseriez pour rallier le maximum de gens à travailler pour notre survie en tant que conseil des commissaires élus? On a déjà quand même discuté de quelques pistes. Peut-être qu'on pourrait compléter avec Mme French qui désirait justement intervenir sur les façons de communiquer.
Well, and building on what we talked about in the previous question, I think this is where we need to examine ourselves. So as we talk about evolving the role, what do you do? What kind of outreach do you make to your community that elected you? I've, in my 20 years as a school board trustee, I've been acclaimed a number of times and I've been elected a couple of times. And I can tell you, I worked very differently when I was being acclaimed than when I had to run an election. And we need to think about that really carefully because you are campaigning every day. You should be campaigning every day as far as what you do and the value that you offer and why you need to be there. And I think, and I'm speaking personally, you may not, but I think that I've forgotten that in many cases. And I've become much more aware of it as I talk to other provinces who are facing this question. We need to make sure people know who we are and what we do. And if you meet someone who doesn't, then that's your opportunity. And I think we've got to step it up a notch, particularly in Quebec right now. I urge you, build those relationships with your community members. Find the Merles. You've got to make sure people understand that because those are the people who will speak up and say, wait a minute, I can't lose that person. I will need them someday. I need to keep them there.
Merci. Thank you, Mrs. French. Monsieur Fortier, vouliez-vous avoir le petit mot de la fin, peut-être?
Bien, si je peux me permettre le mot de la fin, je sais que vous êtes des personnes extrêmement occupées. que vous êtes venus de loin, mais que vous savez à quel point, même si c'est dans un endroit où on n'est pas... Hein, je suis allé au School Board américain récemment et leur congrès, il était 5000.
Oh.
Et donc, je voulais, au nom de l'ensemble des élus scolaires ici et l'ensemble des directions générales qui vont profiter aussi de votre sagesse, je voulais vous remercier, mais vraiment, vraiment, vraiment sincèrement. Vous êtes des amis du Québec, vous êtes des amis canadiens, des amis américains, et je sais que le baromètre politique nous indique qu'une tempête s'en vient, et nous sentons que vous serez là pour nous. Merci infiniment pour votre présence.
Merci. Thank you for being with us today. Thank you very much. Une bonne main d'applaudissements. Big round of applause for our guests.